Everybody, welcome back with the Flapper. Platypus is the name, and today we are talking about Pokemon Pocket. I'm going to attempt to give new people who are not super experienced in Pokemon kind of a little bit of a guide here on how to evaluate cards. What are the important stat breakpoints for cards? What's an indicator of powerful cards versus weak cards? And kind of hopefully this will give you a little bit of a tool set where you could then look at a card and tell me if it's powerful or not. Right. I want you to be able to take a look at Chansey here and tell me, is this card great or is it terrible at the end of this? So that's just an example. I don't know, but if that's the card you're going to use, but let's start talking about it. So I kind of want to break it down into a couple things. I want to start with attack breakpoints. What are the important numbers to hit on attacks that make differences? What are the HP breakpoints? And then kind of go into additional costs that you want to consider. And I'll give some Pokemon as different examples. And then I'm going to try to give an example of two similar Pokemon, with one being very good and one being not so good at the end of the video as well. That way, even though they might look similar, one is good, one is bad, and I will explain why using what we have talked about. So let's jump into it. Very first, we're going to go into the attack breakpoints. And the most important attack breakpoint first, I mean, you're going to take a look, you're going to look at a lot of attacks. Let's go with we're going to do upper limit of 40 here. So when you're looking at characters that deal attack, you're going to see a lot of 20s and 30s. I actually think the first big breakpoint here is 40 attack damage, which is very rare for some Pokemon have it for 2 energy. However, this is one thing that I think if they release characters that have 40 for 1 energy like this, yes, this is a stage 1, and we'll talk more about costs in that regard later. But this is pretty darn good. Why is 40 good? 40 is good because it does two-shot a lot of early things. But the reason that's so important is that even if you, let's say you get to a stage 1 like Ivysaur here, right? He has more than 80 HP. But if you have type advantage on a Pokemon, you could two-shot essentially every single Pokemon, every stage 1 Pokemon that you have type advantage against, right? So it's a pretty powerful breakpoint. But also, it's more devastating than you would expect, because a lot of these things heal for 30, potions heal for 20. So you're still doing permanent damage. It's just the very first number that I feel is very noticeable. When you're doing 30 damage, it tends to just not quite get the job done, especially over 2 turns. The difference between doing 60 to a Pokemon and then doing 80 is so huge for so many of these Pokemon that you're able to kill. And a Pokemon I want to highlight here for this, even though it doesn't ever have the type advantage, is Farfetch'd. Farfetch'd is a stage 1 Pokemon, only 60 HP, but I actually think that's fine, with a 40 damage leak slap. Now, you could run things like Doduo, but stage 1 is a little bit harder to run, but still, I think Farfetch'd is just a great Pokemon in general, and is the first important, makes a lot of cuts just for having that 40 damage with 1 energy cost. The next big stat point, the big attack stat point, is 90 damage. 90 damage is huge. And now this is a bad example. This actually has more than 90. This is effectively 100. In fact, if they lowered this to 80 damage and they put maybe even less, they could probably lower this to 70 damage, take a energy off, and this card would probably be better, in my opinion. I would have to think about it more, but 90 damage is really important. And 90 damage, again, you could say that it one-shots a lot of stuff, right? A lot of the things that you missed with the 2 hits of 80, you could hit with 1 hit of 90. But what I think is more important is that at 90 damage, you can essentially two-shot every single thing in the game. Let's take a look at things with, attack damage, HP. Let's go to 160 HP. So you do 180, right? But this is basically, if you did 80 damage instead of 90, you could do these. So at 80 damage, you do a lot and you can kill a lot of stuff. But when you're at 90 damage, I mean, there's literally nothing in the game, I think, that survives it. I mean, maybe there's something that I don't have here. I think Venusaur EX has a bit more. But it's you're basically just two-shotting everything. You don't have to worry about it. It's just, boom. The HPs almost never go above 180. That's the hard cap, except I think Venusaur EX is at 190. But if you're doing 90 damage anyway to it twice, that it's a very narrow situation. You don't have to worry about it too much. This is one of the reasons why EX Pikachu is so strong, right? If you come over here to EX Pikachu, which is somewhere down here, I know where it's at. All right, it's not my first day. If you come down here to EX Pikachu, right, they do 30 damage times the number of electrical bench Pokemon, so it could do up to 90 damage for only 2 energy, and it has 120 HP. Like this card is very, very, very strong, and for a lot of reasons, and that we'll get to more. But like 90 damage is so devastating on 2 energy because you're always 2-shotting everything. A lot of things you could 1-shot, but the things that you can't, you can always 2-shot. So very, very powerful breakpoint. After this, the one that I think is a little more narrow, but still pretty darn important is 120. So if you take a look at things with 120 HP, let's actually go 120 and no lower limit here. So everything here, you're going to be able to 1-shot. And the reason why this is important is actually mostly like what I just said before is Pikachu EX, right? Pikachu EX, you're probably going to see a lot. He has 120 HP. So this allows you to 1-shot. If you get 1-shot an EX Pokemon, that is huge, right? So 120 damage is a lot, and it is definitely worth it. Being able to 1-shot the non-EX Mewtwo is pretty good too, because he does 120 damage. So like it's basically what I think 120 is like not the most important stat point to break because there's a lot of irrelevant Pokemon. But from a meta standpoint, there are some super important Pokemon you want to be hitting right at that amount. Finally, I think 150 attack is the next kind of break point that after you get up to 150, you don't really care that much about going higher. It becomes more of a meta call at that point, because right now if you go above 150, these are the things that you're missing basically. Not quite all this stuff, but if you're at 150 and not higher, you're not going to quite 1-shot Charizard EX, Venusaur. I mean, again, with type bonuses, you go up to 170 and you are still going to kill the Venusaur. You are still going to kill the Executor. Like if Charizard attacks them, they die. But there are a few things you miss, but you hit the most important things, right? Like Mewtwo EX. Gengar, I don't think is that much of a threat. Honestly, I just don't think he is. You could throw a Giovanni in here as well and then get the Dragonite, no problem. I do recommend running a Giovanni. It's a pretty hard card to use and actually get value out of it. It's more of a meta thing, but I think you're hitting most everything, right? Because keep in mind, the only things, I guess let's take a look here, right? Let's even go one step further here. Let's just take a look at every single Pokemon with more than, let's say 170. Let's say we're running the Giovanni. So these are the things that are out of reach, right? It's basically these things right here. It's like 4 Pokemon. And I'm sorry, I don't have literally everything. I think Venusaur EX would be here as well, but for the most part, it's like it's just not really the premium you pay to get your damage that high. I don't think is currently worth it. And absolutely would yeah, the only thing I'm missing here is the Venusaur EX. So yeah, it's just not worth it to go that high. There's not that many Pokemon that do it, but I think 150 is going to serve you super well in almost everything. You're not going to really need to worry about it at that point. Or at least you don't want to pay a big premium to get that extra attack. If it happens to have it and it's a great card, then that's one thing. But if you're suddenly paying 5 energy to get that effect or something, not as much. And like in this case, you have to discard energy. That's a little rough to use sometimes. All right, next let's talk about HP. So HP is much simpler and it's going to pretty much mirror the attacks, right? You want to look at things, in my opinion, that have a basically 10 HP more than what the attack break points are that matter. So 50 HP is like the first one that's really nice to have. If you have 50 HP or more, right? But if you have 50 HP, that's basically as low as you want to go. You don't want to have 50 HP, but you really don't want to have 40 HP. You don't want your Pokemon to get 1-shot by a Farfetch that only needs 1 energy to deal it. You don't want your Pokemon to get 1-shot by a 20 power attack that has type advantage. It's too risky to run 40 HP on the front line. You could run it if it's a basic Pokemon and you're going to stage 2 or stage 3 it. That's totally different. But if you're going to try to like open with a Pokemon and it has under 40 HP, I mean, that's just waiting to lose a point for literally no investment from your opponent. So 50 HP is about as low as I go for a Pokemon that I'm actually willing to put up there and attack with willingly. And then the second breakpoint is, again, remember how I said 90 was really good? You know what's really good also for HP is 100. because you're just getting out of those important ranges. So if we look at things that have a minimum of 100 HP, you can actually find some of my favorite Pokemon here. Let's go back here and let's go with Pokemon up to HP limit of, let's look at actually exactly 100. It's like some of my favorite Pokemon are in here. So if you look at 100 HP, there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's a lot of average stuff in there too, but also you get like things like Kangaskhan. It is so nice, and actually Pharaoh's really good too, but maybe not quite as good because the lightning weakness. But like, again, Pikachu EX is in a lot of decks that I'm playing against right now because it's such a good card. And so having 100 HP, so you always get to survive one attack unless they have a Giovanni or something, but you don't really play around them having that multiple times. So having that extra 10 HP really is that much of a difference. 90 HP, you're getting one shot very frequently. 100 HP in water is also not very good, I'll admit. But I mean, there's other Pokemon you're going to come up against. And again, because a lot of Pokemon can hit that 70 to 90 HP thing, you definitely just want to be able to survive one hit at minimum. And so 100 HP is a really, really nice breakpoint. But here's the thing. After 100 HP, it becomes more meta dependent because it doesn't really matter. That's kind of the last HP breakpoint that really matters. Once you get above 100, 100 and 150, they're not that much different. You do get to survive some more attacks, but when it comes to like the meta stuff, like if you have 100 HP and you're going up against a Pikachu EX, the difference between having 100 HP and having 180 HP is 0 turns. You still die in 2 attacks. So once you get up to 100, like 100 HP, a lot of the Pokemon that are really strong, I feel like tend to not really care, because if they're going to 2-round you, they're going to 2-round you from 150 HP anyway. It will increase your survivability against some one-hit attacks, right? Like if you have 160, maybe Charizard can't get you, but then if they're running Charizard EX hitting for 200, it's kind of irrelevant. So I would say the next kind of breakpoint here is like a 190 HP is like a pretty good HP point. But the thing is, there's literally one Pokemon in the game with 190, and I don't even have them. It's Venusaur EX. And I still think that's like not a, like, obviously, I mean, I think that card's pretty good, but it allows you to survive 2 90-hit strikes and live. It allows you to survive multiple, you know, it allows you to survive and not immediately die from one of these like big 150, 160. Like you can survive a Mewtwo attack and still be totally fine. You'll die the next time he hits you, but at least you get to survive an attack. Whereas Pikachu, it takes 3 attacks. That is a pretty big breakpoint there. But yeah, overall, I don't really think there's that much of a breakpoint past 100 that's super significant that I've found. But once you're up to 190, I guess that's a little bit of a different story, huh? All right, now that we've gone over the breakpoints, I kind of want to talk about the costs that cards have. Cards have quite a few different costs associated with them, and depending on those costs, it will affect how good the card is, right? So here's a couple things. First is the stage. The stage is probably the biggest cost, right? So on average, not even on average, in 100% of situations, stage 1 Pokemon that can evolve into stage 2 are going to be weaker than a stage 1 Pokemon that doesn't evolve, right? Like Parasect does 80 damage for 3 at 120 HP. He only has 90 HP, does 60 damage for 3, right? It just, Parasect is strictly better than Ivysaur because Ivysaur is paying a premium to be able to go into stage 2. So for the most part, stage 1s are just kind of bad, but also like stage 1s that can evolve are bad. But if you're trying to run a stage 2 Pokemon, you are paying a big cost in deck, how many spaces it takes up in your deck. Because you're probably running 2 Bulbasaurs, probably running 2 Ivysaurs and 2 Venusaurs, because you want to actually get to stage 2. So you don't want one copy of any of these cards, because you need to draw all 3 of them to ever get to this, right? And so you're paying a big cost in the amount of space it takes up in your deck, which is worth it in a lot of situations. But you don't want to run, well, and then also you're paying a big cost in consistency. You're not going to be able to get this down by turn 2, ever. By turn 3, if you have to have drawn all 3 of them to have this up. So it's slow, it's a little bit clunky, and it's inconsistent. That doesn't make them worthless at all. But as a rule of thumb, I would almost never run a 3-line, 2 different stage 3s in a 20-card deck. If I'm running Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, I'm not also running Weedle, Kakuna, Beedrill. Like, I'm just not running that. That's 12 cards in a 20 card deck. And 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, most of those cards, 2/3 of those cards don't do anything unless I draw the basic in the first place. So you could have a hand that's just too clunky to do anything. I think it's paying too much consistency at that point. So staged Pokemon have a cost of consistency and of deck building size, which are relevant costs. Another cost that is super important is the energy cost, right? So if we're comparing Bulbasaur to Farfetch'd, you are paying 1 green and 1 colorless for 40 damage. So you're getting 20 damage per energy, essentially, right? Whereas Pikachu is doing 90 damage per, or, you know, 90 damage for 2 energy. So 45 damage per energy, whereas Farfetch is doing 40 damage per energy. So you kind of want to think about this, because this number correlates in the tempo, essentially. If this has 1 energy and it did 100 damage, it'd be the best attack in the game, right? If it had 3 energy and it did 100 damage, it would be not good at all, because it's just too much. It's too slow to get it going. By that point, your enemy's Pokemon are evolving. You're not one-shotting them. You've already taken damage probably. So you want to think about how much damage you're doing for the energy. But again, it's contextual to the card. This card is not meant to be on your front line using Vine Whip. The card is not there for that. It is bad at that. This card is meant to sit on your back line and be built up. You know, you have something kind of stalling a little bit, a starter Pokemon. And then once you get this guy up to 3 and then 4 energy, now you have your payoff, right? Now you're doing 80 damage, which is actually worse per energy, but he heals, right? Maybe he's like just a bad example. If we take a look at Squirtle, who's I just think probably a better card, or Blastoise, right? You don't want to use Water Gun. It's just not that good. You could be doing twice as much damage with a Farfetch'd with the same HP. War Turtle, right? 40 damage. Again, this is now, you have now officially become a Farfetch'd with a little bit more HP, but you needed 2 cards and 2 energy. Bad card. But when you get the Blastoise, you have 3, you're doing 80. But when you get up to 5, you're doing 140. And now you're just one-shotting most everything in the game, especially if you bring a Giovanni. So, like, the energy costs are super, super important, which is obvious, but something being high or low doesn't always equate to good or bad. In a rough sense, it can, but if a card is designed to be played later in the game, a higher cost is not that bad, right? Like, also, another thing I want to mention here is colored pips. This is not relevant if you're running 1 color of deck, right? If I'm running a fire deck, this is irrelevant. However, if I'm playing a fire and a water deck, suddenly this becomes super important, because this is actually really good, because this card could be run in 2 different colored decks, because all I ever need is to draw 1 fire energy for it to use this attack at least once. Or like 1 fire energy to use this, or 1 fire energy to use flamethrower, right? So there are cards that have a lot of colorless pips, tend to have weaker effects on average, but the premium is that you could run them in a deck with other stuff as well, right? Eevee's cards are really good at this because they're kind of meant to be run together, right? You could run 2 Eevees, and then you could run Flareon, Jolteon, Vaporeon, each of which only requires 1 energy of the corresponding type. So whatever one you get, you could throw on there and then evolve it into that. It's not a good deck, but the idea is there, right? That's why you get colorless pips. So that is something that is worth keeping in mind as well. Also, just quickly to touch on opportunity cost, which is always a thing, and especially in card games, is your deck has a limited amount of slots, right? So maybe you want to run all these different lines of Pokemon, but you really don't want to do too many different things. This is less about how to evaluate a card and more just like deck building in general. But like, yeah, I want to run Kingler, I want to run Seadra, I want to run Goldeen and Sea King. You run all these cards, and then suddenly you just have a bunch of Pokemon, and you don't have any like items, and you don't have any trainers, and you don't have stuff like this. So you don't want to overload your deck with just Pokemon. Like that's just the opportunity cost that's associated with a card. It's not actually on the card, but it's something to keep in mind. When you're considering adding to stage 2, keep in mind, again, how many card slots that actually takes. All right, finally, we got the retreat cost here. This is not super important in all decks, but there are some decks where it's really good. The lower the retreat cost, the better. This is how much energy you have to discard from this card to take it out of play and put a different card into play. 4 is like incredibly high, but it goes all the way down to 0, right? I think Electrode has 0. Electrode has 0. So you could do a lot of, there are some decks where you want to put in a character early They attack and they attack, and then you could just kind of switch them out, and then they can do a bunch of damage. A perfect example, I mean, Electrode's a great example of that as well, but even a better example, just like Electrode but better, is Starmie EX, right? 90 damage for 2 energy, 130 HP. And because you're getting that EX benefit of like a bunch of extra damage, like 20 more damage and a bunch more HP for tankiness, whenever this gets low, you get to switch it out. So you don't typically want a bunch of cards like Gyarados, because sometimes you could be in danger of like dying and just like losing. Like if they do something and they suddenly like, oh, I'm going to lose next turn and I want to switch Gyarados out. If I don't, for some reason, I don't have 4 energy or something, like it could be so hard to get these out, even if you're using X speed. So I don't always super consider the retreat cost, but for some decks, I definitely do. A perfect example of a card that I never retreat and it annoys me is Kangaskhan. This card has a 3 retreat cost, but only needs 1 energy to attack. So I typically put 1 energy on here and I just start swinging, right? And then I'm kind of waiting for it to die. But in some matches, maybe I'm using Farfetch'd instead, where it only needs 1 energy to attack and 1 to retreat. Where now, if I get late into the game and I still have a Farfetch'd out there, I could just, instead of attacking, I could switch the Farfetch'd out for like my Blastoise, who now finally has 5 energy and can start sweeping. So these are relevant. Like the worst thing about Kangaskhan is that 3 energy cost. Otherwise, it's like one of my favorite cards in the entire game. It can be very awkward when you want to get it out yourself, because you don't want to spend 2 turns giving it energy just to take it out. All right, so let's take a look at 2 cards here. Maybe they're not the perfect 2 to compare, but they're very similar cards in some ways and then very different in other ways. So why is Nidoking a bad card? And why is Pikachu EX a good card? And now I know it might be controversial to say Nidoking's a bad card. I know he's one of my favorite Pokemon and I really like him. And in fact, I'm going to do a deck guide around him as well. But if we're talking realistic numbers here, this card is way worse than Pikachu EX for a lot of reasons. So on the face value, they both do the same amount of damage, right? Pikachu has a deck building restriction, essentially. You want to put all lightning Pokemon, so that's a bit of a cost there. You don't really want to do that necessarily, but it's not a big thing. But he could do up to 90 damage, and he has 120 HP, whereas this character always does 90 damage regardless of what's on your bench, and he poisons, and he has more HP. So why is Nidoking bad while Pikachu EX is good? It's not just because the EX in his name, I promise. But, so, this is all basically about tempo and the amount you need to invest and the play patterns that emerge from actually playing these cards. So the first thing is Nidoking takes 6 cards in your deck to be able to even use them. You need to run 2 Nidorans, and Nidokings, right? In order just to have this guy out, you need to have 6 cards in your deck. You need to draw 3 of them. And then at the absolute fastest you can ever attack with this guy is on your, if you're going second, on your 3rd turn, if you spend all 3 of your energy on him. So realistically, he might be attacking on your 4th turn if you just don't, if you put an energy on like something else to attack 1st turn. So this guy is doing this by turn roughly 4. And then he is poisoning them, so it will do a little bit more damage over the turn. But the damage at 90 is good, but the extra bonus you're getting from the poison is very, very likely to be insignificant, especially because you can like evolve out of poison and things like that. If this was only required 2 energy and it was like 80 damage, maybe, I bet that would just make him a better Pokemon overall. So it's slow, right? It's the minimum of turn 4. It takes a bunch of cards in your deck to make it work. And then you have to put in, and then the poison bonus that you're getting, the upside, is not very good. The 150 HP is nice and it's better, but like we talked about, you're not really surviving that many more things with 150 than you are 120. I mean, yes, again, there's going to be specific things in the meta, but most things that 2-shot Pikachu EX are going to 2-shot you. When we start getting to 3-shot territory, I don't think that's usually as relevant. Like, yeah, you can get 3-shot by a lot more things probably. Like if something's hitting for 40, it's going to kill you, whereas it's not going to kill Nidoking. But I think for the most part, you're going to die to the same amount of things and the same amount of attacks on average. So you're paying a big, big, big premium to use Nidoking. You are using, and your payoff for getting that is poison and extra. It requires more energy. But in return for all this opportunity cost, it gives you poison and more HP. Also, the downside is it has a 3 retreat cost. So if he starts losing, because you poison him and now you want to pull him out to do something else. He just kind of is stuck there. You have to lose all your tempo, discard all of his energy just to not lose him. Pikachu, on the other hand, has a 120 HP. So he survives one shot pretty much anything, especially in the early game. On turn, he's a basic Pokemon. You only need to run this card. You don't even need to run 2 of them if you don't have to. The reason you run 2 of all these cards is because you need to draw them all for Nidoking to ever work. But this card, you can just run 1 of it if you draw it, but you want to run 2 of them. So it takes 2 cards, so a third the amount of cards. It takes it instead of attacking on average, probably turn 4, because you don't want to spend your first 3 turns doing nothing, just putting energy on a Nidoran that's starting to die because it's just getting attacked and not doing much damage back. You get to start attacking for 90 damage on turn 2. You have to draw lightning cards, right? But I mean, you put 2 Pikachu EX in your deck, you're gonna have lightning cards. You're not gonna be like, oh shit, it's all grass types, you know. And then when Pikachu EX starts to die, if you're like, he's gonna die next turn, you could retreat him for 1 of his 2 energy. And that's even better when you retreat him for 1 of his 2 energy instead of 2 of them, because then if something happens where you could switch him back in to deal 90 damage, you only need to put the 1 energy for your turn on him. So it's just like, this card is a 10 out of 10. This is like one of the most powerful cards in the entire game, and Nidoking is not that good. But I just kind of wanted to compare 2 cards that do similar damage, have similar HP pools, and why one is so good and why one is like super mid at best, in my opinion. Maybe Nidoking, you know, if you're a Nidoking believer, let me know. But there are other examples I could have used here, right? Like, you know, maybe Lapras versus something else. But this is kind of what I wanted to just show you. So when you look at a card, let's take a random card, and so, well, not random. Let's take a look if it's good. Oh, you know what? I got a perfect example. My favorite card in the game that is not very good. Let's look at Alakazam. Yes, I know. Alakazam is not a very good card. But this is actually this is a side note, but this is going to be kind of interesting because I think hopefully this will help you look at the meta. Think about what you're going to be fighting against a lot of times. And although I will say this is pretty good against Pikachu because it does one-shot Pikachu, but there are 3 super popular cards right now because they're the shiny ones. Pikachu EX, Charizard EX, Mewtwo EX. So what does Alakazam do? He's got 130 HP and is his stage 2. So he's actually weaker than Nidoking. But the upside is he actually does a ton of damage. He does 60 damage flat, which is not good. But for every energy on your opponent's Pokemon, he does 30 more. This is a way better upside. This is way better than Nidoking. But why is it still not very good? It is good in a lot of situations and against a lot of decks. But you're going to be facing a lot of Mewtwo and Charizard EX. And what do they do when they attack? They discard their energy. So they're going to go from 4 energy down to 2. So this is hitting for 120. 120 is good, but they both one-shot him. So they're going to discard their energy to kill something, right? Then you're going to switch in and not be able to even kill him. So it's just kind of like awkward. He's just not good in the current meta where the most popular cards are discarding their energy, right? However, once those cards lose popularity in some way, because maybe they're either not the best or they're just new cards come out people want to use, Alakazam is a card that's going to get a lot better in my opinion, because like if someone has 4 energy on him, right, he is for 3, 6, 9, 12, 180 damage. 180 damage is one-shotting tons of stuff in this game. I mean, almost literally everything, right? And again, even if they only have 3 energy, he's hitting them for 150. So Alakazam is a super good card, but right now he's kind of not good, specifically because what you're going up against. However, if you go up against like a Blastoise Lapras deck, you feel like a king because they're trying to put 10 energy on their card and you self-destruct them. But yeah, hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully it didn't go on too long. I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, that is all for today. So yeah, Alakazam's a good card, but he's just not good right now, in my opinion. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Thank you very much. I'm going to be making more Pokemon videos in the future, more guides and stuff closer to when the game actually releases. But for now, that's all. Thank you very much. For Platypus is purpaltypus. I'll see you on the flip-flops. Bye!